Well, hi everyone. My name is Helen,
And my name is Wynta.
and we are clinical fellows here at the GC. And today we're going to be talking to you, or whoever's watching, about racial microaggressions. We have a lovely PowerPoint to share, and I'm going to find it and share it with you all. Okay.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this topic, Helen.
Yeah, I think this is something that, is really obviously very prevalent in graduate school. And I
For
think this is
sure.
something that people need to think and talk about. So here we are. Okay, so the title of this workshop or video is How Do I Respond? Navigating and Coping with Racial Microaggressions in Graduate School. Um, they can be with supervisors, with faculty members, with other students. Basically, we're just going to be kind of like exploring what that looks like and how um, you might be able to deal with it if you come across a situation like
Right.
this. Okay, so objectives are to examine how racial microaggressions affect mental health and academic performance, because it does, to identify strategies for addressing and coping with ongoing discrimination as a graduate student, and to develop a supportive network, because all of those three things are pretty crucial, I think, for surviving graduate school.
I would agree.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a little video. So Toni Morrison, you may or may not have heard of her. She is an author, and she does a lot of work regarding, like racial differences, sort of like being a minority, how to like handle that. Hopefully this video works, but this is
Mhm.
just like a little snippet of it. So let's see if it works.
Maybe I'm responding because I have had reviews in the past that have accused me of not writing about white people. I remember a review of Sula in which the reviewer said, this is all well and good, but one day she, meaning me, will have to face up to the real responsibilities and get mature and write about the real confrontation for Black people, which is white people. As though our lives have no meaning and no depth without the white gaze. And I've spent my entire writing life trying to make sure that the white gaze was not the dominant one in any of my books. And the people who helped me most arrive at that kind of language were African natives. General Ortega, Bessie Head, those writers who could assume the centrality of their race because they were African. And they didn't explain anything to white people. Those questions were incomprehensible to them. Those questions that I would have as a minority living in an all white country like the United States. But when I read um, the poetry of Cesar, or the poetry of Senghor, or the novels particularly, Things Fall Apart was more important to me than anything. Only because there was a language, there was a posture, there were the parameters. I could step in now, and I didn't have to be consumed by or be concerned by the white gaze. That was the liberation for me. It has nothing to do with who reads the books. Everyone of any race, any gender, any country. But my sovereignty and my authority as a racialized person had to be struck immediately with the very first book.
Right. That was so powerful. I mean, Toni Morrison, as folks may know, was really big on centering minoritized voices. And we're talking about as early as the 70s,
Mhm.
right? Like
Yeah.
with Sula, The Bluest Eye, Beloved. And she really had to deal with this confrontation over and over throughout her career of being subjected to these criticisms of
Yeah.
her centering minoritized voices as a minoritized woman,
Yeah.
right?
Totally. Yeah, and I think something about graduate school in particular is that, the history of academia in general is very classist, very focused on the white experience.
Mhm.
And so I think a lot of people, rather, like doesn't matter if you're like a faculty member or like a student, it's like we find ourselves in this system that like perpetuates the sort of like white gaze or white values that Toni Morrison was kind of like referring to.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So,
And
oh,
maybe
this
I'm
always happens. Okay. Anyway, so
Okay.
now we're going to talk about race and
This intersectionality.
intersectionality.
Yes. Okay. So with that said, we're going to talk about what's known as the race talk and challenges with this, right? So, race talk specifically refers to dialogue or conversation that include topics like race and racism and white privilege, right? And then societal norms within this our politeness protocol. So this protocol dictates people should be polite when engaging with others. However, consequently, it does discourage discussions of topics that are potentially offensive for some or may make some individuals uncomfortable. And then regarding this academic protocol, this attempts to simplify the classroom experience by providing, let's say, one objective answer for things without really any nuance. So, with that said, the academic protocol dictates academia to be categorized by objectiveness, so no subjective experiences really, detachment, and main value empirical reality over experimental reality, right? So bell hooks specifically was the one that had put this into context. Race talk violates academic protocol in a number of ways. So race talk involves an exploration of lived experiences, where academic protocol preferences empirical research along with facts. And talking about race for people of color includes discussing their experiences of racism, a conversation that tends to prove impossible to detach from emotion. And when a conversation abides by the academic protocol, this embodiment of racism becomes largely ignored. And then we also have noted here the colorblind protocol, which states that race does not and should not matter. Now, this approach to a conversation is quote unquote problematic for a couple of reasons, right? So it de-emphasizes individual experiences in favor of this more broader, this more universal experience. And there is recent research into colorblindness that demonstrates the strategic nature of it, such that white people believe if they evolve talking about race completely, that they will then thus subsequently be seen as less racist. And through colorblindness is activated to avoid seeming racist, research does demonstrate a complete opposite effect, such that those who employ colorblind racism are often perceived as less friendly, maybe perceived as more cold, more biased. And then another example that has been noted in research helps illustrate the way colorblind ideology impacts conversation. So at a wedding reception, two guests are in conversation, and one brings up the uniqueness of the couple. So the bride being a Black woman from the South, and the groom being, let's say, a white man from New England. And the other guest in the conversation replies saying he hasn't even noticed that the bride was Black until that very moment. His response follows colorblind protocol as he denies the presence of race, claiming not to have even noticed the race of the bride to begin with.
Yeah. I think we'll talk about this a little bit later in the different types of microaggressions, but there's is this very common phrase of like, I don't see color.
Right.
And I'm like, is there something wrong with your eyes? Anyway, so like that kind of is like what we're talking about, right? Like where again, this is a very objective, um, specifically structured system in which there is very little room for talking about experiences other than the main experience or what's dictated to be the normal experience. And so everything that Wynta was saying, so like the politeness protocol, the academic protocol, colorblind protocol, it's all meant to really make everything really homogenous. And so effectively just getting rid of any nuance in the system.
Right. And I know we're not at that point yet, but when I do hear this colorblind perspective in conversation that are aligned with this perspective, it kind of suggests that there is something wrong if you say that you do see color, for
Right,
example, right? So why is it not okay to see someone's color?
right, right. Totally. Okay. Okay.
Okay, so
So,
next up, we'll be talking about intersectionality. So just some background information. So we do have that this term was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, a UCLA and Columbia law professor, and specifically she specialized in race and gender issues. Published in 1989, Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex was focused on three legal cases involving both racial as well as gender discrimination. So, this intersectionality component that we're getting at here. It also argued that the court in these cases have a narrow definition of what discrimination entailed, and it also pointed out that Black women are subjected to discrimination based on race as well as gender, and then often a combination of the two, right? So introducing this phenomenon that we now know as intersectionality. So with that said, it refers to this complex, connected nature of social categorizations applied to an individual and group. And in the previous slide, I've noted race and gender, but it could be comprised of a couple of different sectors, like it's outlined here in this diagram, right? We have education, we have sexuality, one's ability, age, gender, ethnicity, culture, we have language, we have socioeconomic class, and so forth. This connection creates overlapping systems of discrimination or disadvantage that compound one another. The way in which the effects of multiple forms of these power differentials regarding someone's various identities combine and intersect. And it also applies to not just minoritized groups, but the dominant group as well, or dominant groups. Okay, I do like this quote. So by Kimberly Crenshaw, intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it locks and intersects. It is the acknowledgement that everyone has their own unique experiences of discrimination and privilege. I think that is perfectly summed in
mhm,
terms of at least my experience
mhm,
of intersectionality and what that entails.
totally. Yeah.
And speaking of experiences, so I do have outlined here what aspects of your identity feel more central to your self-perspection. Like I think about questions that guide intersectionality as well as my lived experiences.
Mhm,
And I think for me, what comes up, and I ask all of you who are watching this video to think about when you think of your identity, what feels most central to you? Why? I'm thinking about myself.
mhm,
I mean, immediately what comes to mind is being a woman,
mhm,
being a Black woman, being a Black woman student, for
mhm,
example. And then also being a Black woman student who is working within this hierarchical system
mhm,
of graduate school, and how do people then perceive me because of my identities,
mhm,
right? Which then leads to the second question that I would like folks to think about. How do your intersecting identities influence the way that you experience and navigate maybe power or privilege or being marginalized? And how have you seen this play out for you in personal or academic or social settings?
mhm.
I mean, what are your thoughts about the second question?
I think that's really interesting. I mean, like I think that for me, the identities that feel very salient are I'm also a woman, I'm cisgender. I identify as straight. I am Chinese American. Also a student, right? I grew up in kind of like lower middle class, so like the socioeconomic piece is really important to me, as I'm sure that a lot of you guys as graduate students are familiar with the financial struggles of just graduate school. But I do think there are times where I found myself in spaces, whether it's in class or in, like what other seminars, or other spaces where I very much recognize both the privilege that I have, for instance, as like a straight cisgender woman, but then
Mhm.
also like what it means to be a racial minority, right? So it's like there's these conflicting not really conflicting. There's like these like factors kind of working in tandem with each other. And I think there are certain situations where some of those identities are more salient than others or feel more, I guess, like applicable in some way. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that makes any
It
sense. Yeah.
does. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's definitely where you were getting at with how some identities might be salient for you
Hmm.
in certain environments compared to other environments is what I was thinking about when we were conceptualizing these questions.
Hmm.
I'm also thinking about for those who are watching the video, Helen, for you, and then as well as for me, in what ways have our intersecting identities kind of shaped our experiences with microaggressions or biases?
Hmm.
How have you responded in the past? How and what strategies have you found helpful in those situations? We'll be talking about coping mechanisms
Hmm.
soon. But just thinking about the ways in which our identities have shaped these experiences.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think there's also something to be said about, like identities that are not quite as visible, right? So like, there are some people who are disabled or have like chronic illnesses that cannot be, you can't see it, right? So and then
Right.
so that, also complicates the experience of, okay, so if I can't see it, therefore it must not be there or it must not be
Mhm.
relevant or so whatever that I think people sometimes tend to have. So,
For sure.
there is like this spectrum of like somebody seeing me, for instance, can very obviously tell that I am Asian, but then in terms of like other aspects of my identity, it's harder to kind of distinguish. And I think that's when people start to make assumptions and when some of these like microaggressions can really come out.
For sure. And
Yeah.
speaking of microaggressions, you're also making me think of more direct, maybe visible microaggressions, right? Or in terms of like if someone says something and
Mhm.
you're like, okay, that was clearly a microaggression,
Right.
right? Versus microaggressions that might not be as explicit,
Yeah.
right? So like I'm thinking about and I do feel like this part is important because
Mhm.
I feel like sometimes it could be misread as different things because we don't really know like if someone is walking past you and they clutch their purse, for
Right.
example, or if you go to sit down next to someone and they get up
Yeah.
immediately. I mean that it could be for a myriad of factors,
Yeah.
right? Or it could be a microaggression. So
Right.
also thinking about more explicit microaggressions and then also like microaggressions that are a little less explicit as
Yeah.
well too. You
Totally.
also had me thinking about that when we talked about the less visible identities
Hmm.
that individuals have that are not as talked about.
Right. And speaking of microaggressions, so we will kind of get into what they are, different types of microaggressions, because there are a few different types. Um, so this is another quote because we love our quotes, and I think this is a really good one. So microaggressions is um, how your context gets translated. Well, not microaggressions, but in terms of like our biases, right? The way that we like view things. It's how
Mhm.
your context gets translated through someone else's lens. I think that's another way that the very essence of your life is up for definition based on any particular lens that a white person is wearing on any particular day in any particular moment. So this is specifically about the experience of Black Americans, and this connects really beautifully with Toni Morrison's video when she was talking about like everything kind of catering to the white gaze, right? So it is like a very it can be, you know, just a very I don't know, fluid or like circumstantial situation when it comes to like biases and the ways that people decide to treat other people based off of like
Mhm.
specific identities. Um, so in terms of what a microaggression is, it's technically defined as a brief everyday exchange that sends denigrating messages to a target group. They express usually some sort of negative sentiment. They're typically towards stigmatized or culturally marginalized groups. And they're usually, they share a few characteristics. So they're usually unconscious and automatic,
Mhm.
which speaks to these like deeper stereotypes or beliefs that people might have. They can be either verbal or nonverbal, so kind of like what Wynta was saying, like somebody like clutching their bag closer to them as you walk by. They're subtle and indirect. They're likelier to happen when people dismiss that their actions could be influenced by race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, so forth, which is, goes back to our previous point of color blindness, right? If somebody is just like, I don't see color, therefore I can't be biased or do these things, that's what, what we're getting at here. And they can also be environmental. So lack of representation in schools, professions, arts, things that are really perpetuated within the system. Okay. So because we're talking about racial microaggressions, these are specifically just everyday things, everyday slights, insults, invalidations, behaviors that BIPOC individuals experience with seemingly quote unquote well-intentioned white people who may be unaware of the impact of their words and actions. And there has been a lot of literature looking at microaggressions. I think Sue is like a really big person in this field. And one of their articles determined there are like four big forms of microaggressions, which is micro assaults, micro insults, micro invalidations, and environmental microaggressions, which are more macro level. So like not micro, but still a type of those things. Okay. So we talked a little bit about some of these, but there are a few types of racial microaggressions, and in us talking about it, maybe some of these like resonate with you guys. There's an alien in one's own land, which is like, where are you really from? I know I've gotten this question, which, I'm just like California. I don't know, but there's like, just like this automatic assumption, right?
It's like they want you to say
Yeah.
an Asian country,
yeah.
right?
And I'm like, well, sometimes I'm just like, should I just like troll somebody and be like, actually, I'm from Kazakhstan, like that sort of thing. I don't know, who knows? But yeah, there's that feeling, right, of like where are you really from? Like where are you look for and where are you really from? Color blindness, which we've talked about.
Right.
And people are just people. Everybody has a soul. Everybody has a heart. I'm like, you know what? Sure. But that only goes so far.
Yep.
It really negates the experiences of a lot of people to assume that. Attributing intelligence, so like, wow, you're so articulate. Wow, you read so well. Wow,
You're so well spoken.
Yeah, you're so well spoken. I expected you to be, I don't know, like use more slang or like
I've gotten
blah,
this
blah,
a
blah.
lot of I've gotten this a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Objectification, fetishizing, exoticism. So like, can I touch your hair? Right? Like, um, really sort of focusing on certain attributes that people of color have in a way that feels like violating.
Yeah, this is one that I've definitely received over and over throughout my life, in terms of individuals wanting to touch my afro texture hair. And I know we're not getting into texturism in today's presentation, but that's a huge one. And it's like, no, am I a farm animal?
Yeah.
Is this a zoo? Am I at a petting zoo?
Yeah. Like, just keep your hands to yourself. They teach you this in preschool. Like,
Exactly.
what are you doing?
I've had someone actually touch my hair without axing.
Well, I hope they're not doing that anymore. That's what I'll say. I'll keep it at that. I'll keep it professional. That's all I'll say about that. Okay, and here are some more because there's a lot.
Yeah.
So denial of belongingness. So this sense of I think this is like something that I more so witnessed with people, especially getting into college. It's just like, oh, well, how did you get here? Like, you only got here because you're, Latinx. You only got here because you're blah, blah, blah. Like, you're like a minority hire, like that sort of thing.
Yeah, I've also seen this just like observationally, like on the plane, there are people of color sitting in like either first class or business class. And I've literally have overheard conversations where individuals who are not of color are asking the individuals of color, like, are you sure you're in the right seat? For example, that's also a way that this can manifest as well.
Most definitely. Yeah. Pathologizing communication style. So can you tone it down? You're coming across as too aggressive, right? I think this goes into the dialogue of, like a lot of like Black and Latinx women and men, I guess, but like specifically women because of that intersectionality piece, right? Of being a
Right.
woman, of just being like,
This
if you're,
angry black
yeah,
woman, right? Stereotype for sure.
yeah, yeah. Assumption of the correctness of stereotypes and traditional roles. So you must be great at sports. What position did you play?
Mhm.
Everybody's like, you're great at math. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I don't really know where you get this idea from. I actually hate math with a passion, so you're completely wrong. But like things like that, right?
Exactly.
And then denial of individuality. So for instance, you're black, so you must love hip hop, right? Like, or you're like Asian, so you must love eating rice. Like, just putting everybody into
And
this like
one
very
exactly.
one group. Yeah. Yeah. And here we are with some more.
Yeah.
So second class citizenship, assuming a POC, a BIPOC person is a service worker.
Mm,
This is, I've encountered this a lot, like not in
okay.
my own life, but I have seen this happen.
Okay.
I've seen this happen with more conservative people in my family
Mm,
who really just are just kind of like, oh, this person works here. And I'm like, no, they do not.
mm,
And you should, so there's that.
um,
Assumption of criminality, which I think is a little bit like,
right. That's what
someone
I was
that's what you
getting
were
at
talking
earlier,
about.
right? Like you're walking on the street, someone
Yeah,
is clutching their purse or their belongings, or if they see you coming, right?
yeah,
They're crossing across the street
right,
when you just happen to get on the street.
right, right. And then denial of individual racism. So like, I'm not racist. I have several blank
Mm-hmm.
friends.
I'm
Yeah,
married to an Asian woman.
yeah,
Right? Like
yeah.
it's this
I
justification, right?
right,
That there's no way I can be racist or
exactly.
hold racist beliefs because my friend group or my spouse or whoever
Right.
is of color, for
Yeah,
example.
yeah.
So that, excuses me of even being able to possess these racist beliefs.
Right, totally. And then myths of meritocracy, which is like everybody can succeed if they work hard enough. This particular one is interesting because I think it really connects to the model minority myth that a
Mm,
lot of specifically like East Asians hold this sort of feeling of like if you're not successful it's because you don't work hard enough, right? And
mm.
that completely negates the
Systematic
systematic
barriers.
barriers, like the historical centuries present barriers that people actively face in their daily lives. And so this feeds back into the kind of criminality, the second class citizenship of like, if you're not successful, it's because you're lazy.
Exactly.
And that's it. Like it's all on you. Right.
Exactly.
So there's that sort of component as well.
Okay, so now we'll talk about navigating as well as coping with racial microaggressions while in graduate school. So how do we address racial microaggressions? I brought up that example of how someone had touched my hair without
Uh,
asking.
yeah.
Not saying if even if they asked, they still would have been granted permission,
Yeah,
but yeah,
totally.
just
Yeah.
going ahead
Yeah.
and just touching me without my permission. I remember assessing, right, am I in danger? Is this person trying to actively harm me?
Yeah.
And then thinking to myself, do I have the energy to manage a potentially defensive or combative reaction?
Yeah.
At that time I did.
Got it.
And my relationship with that person was that I did not know that person.
Okay.
Therefore, there was no relationship for it to be impacted. But
Yeah.
this is an important component to think about
Sure.
if you're not in the similar case like I was, where it was a stranger, and
Yeah.
maybe this was someone who is your mentor, for example,
Hmm.
maybe someone who is your professor, maybe is someone who is your colleague.
Yeah.
How can you go about addressing what happened with
Yeah.
you being microaggressed, for example?
Totally.
Will this relationship be impacted, and will you be okay, for example, if this relationship was impacted negatively,
Yeah.
for example?
Yeah.
Also thinking to yourself, right, if I don't say anything or if I disengage, maybe I walk away, how would I feel about myself? Would I feel negative about myself?
Hmm.
Would I feel positive about myself? Would I feel
Hmm.
neutral? Does it shape my self-image or values if I don't respond? And then ultimately, how much does this matter to me to address the racial microaggression that occurred?
Hmm.
Are all important factors.
Hmm.
So going back to my example, it was very important for me to address this example,
Hmm.
but acknowledging here that there are some factors that made my decision to confront this individual potentially more easier because of this relationship that was not established with
Hmm.
said person.
Totally. Yeah. I think that like segues really nicely in things that make it hard to respond sometimes. So,
For sure. Okay, so right, this is what I was kind of getting at with these dilemmas, right? These psychological dilemmas. So, clash of realities. So, speaker not intending harm, right? Versus listener experiences a reflection of bias, right? And my microaggression was a physical, but we can still use within the same context.
Hmm.
Right. So also thinking about the often unintentional nature of microaggressions can make it challenging to address this issue. Speaker does not intend harm, right? While listener experiences a reflection of bias, maybe
Hmm.
use of incorrect pronouns, for example,
Hmm.
with gender non-conforming individuals. Um, Potentially listener is aggravated that this is continually occurring, this is continually happening, but cisgender speakers view their behaviors as honest mistakes,
Right.
which are common or even accurate.
Yeah.
We also, and then with that said, this can be in the form of an apparent compliment as well from quote unquote people trying to be nice.
Right. Right. Totally. Yeah.
We also have what also could potentially make microaggressions difficult to respond is the invisibility of unintentional bias. So we are socialized to assimilate biases due to systematic oppression and then this related the superiority of dominant groups. So
Hmm.
for example, in the other example, cisgender individuals may not see that there are no gender neutral restrooms due to the belief that only two kinds of restrooms are needed. So
Yeah.
one for those who identify as men and then one for those who identify as women.
Hmm.
We also have perceived minimal harm. Many people, particularly the privileged groups, may see microaggressions as being unimportant or too minor to warrant discussion because the specific incidents are mistakes, for example. But when they occur often, it leads to this accumulation, which can negatively affect colleagues in the workplace. I also want to additionally note here, right?
Hmm.
And thinking about the ways in which those who are in privileged groups, I mean, it is easy for them to see as something being unimportant when something is not directly impacting this individual,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So that's
Hmm.
also something that goes into play here.
Yeah. And I think that there's also like certain cultures that really value this idea of keeping your head down at all times. Like, don't start
Yes,
drama, don't do anything, like be very passive, like
yes.
for just a safety reason. And so I think that in some ways can really feed back into the, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal that
Mhm.
I said this to this person. They don't have a reaction. It's fine.
Yes, I
Yeah.
agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Another thing that can make responding to racial microaggressions difficult, right? It's this catch-22, weighing the pros and cons of responding, like we've noted previously, right? It really does provide an example on why it is often difficult to respond to microaggressions because we have varied perspectives. Everyone does not view the one incident the same way.
Mhm.
And then there are typically repercussions for confrontations as well.
Yeah. And I think maybe we have probably, I think, a side there later, but the sort of power dynamics specifically in graduate school, right? Like kind of like what Winta was saying, her experience with that particular microaggression didn't have the relational piece to it because she
Okay.
didn't know the person, right? Whereas like if I've heard of incidences where people have like a professor who says something like just really insensitive or really harmful. And there's this feeling of like, well, what can I really do? Because this professor has influence over my career, essentially. They can just hold it over my head. And it becomes this sort of like battle of, okay, I guess I just have to sit here and take this somehow,
Mhm.
because the risk of addressing it feels too high.
Yeah, that's an
Yeah.
important one. So then there are also other obstacles specific to microaggressions. So most people view them either as good or caring, fair, ethical. Reacting to their behavior and naming it as discriminatory or racist can be difficult for individuals to understand or tolerate. And also, people may not have the energy,
Mhm.
time, or mental energy to engage as well. Many may respond by explaining away the microaggression, maybe becoming defensive or combative, maybe displaying some intense emotion where whether that's crying or getting angry at the person that's bringing this to the forefront,
Hmm.
maybe accusing you or others of offending them.
Hmm. Yeah. So it can be kind of like a very oftentimes tricky situation.
For sure. Okay, so with all that said, we have some potential options for action regarding how to address racial microaggressions. Right? You can either stop the conversation entirely, right?
Mhm.
Disengage.
Mhm.
You can educate the person who microaggressed you if you have the bandwidth, right? So this is depending on if I have the bandwidth to educate, if I deem that this person is worthy of being able to take what I'm saying to them
Yeah.
and conceptualize this as important and
Right.
then and learn, right? Validating and providing acknowledgement to the targeted person if you're a bystander,
Hmm.
seeking support from peers, support groups, and so forth. Maybe seeking help from a authoritative figure as well. This can look a couple of different ways. Maybe this is a mentor. Maybe this is someone outside of the school system.
Hmm.
This is not just within the graduate school system.
Hmm.
And then perhaps a combination of all the above as well.
Yes. Yeah, I guess like there's another, so talking about microaggressions, there is a flip side to microaggressions known as microaffirmations, which, as they may sound already, are protective factors
Mhm.
against microaggressions. So, just like how microaggressions are very like subtle and can be like unspoken sometimes. Microaffirmations are ways of really validating somebody's experience, um, really moving people towards inclusion, right? And understanding. So things such as like paying attention when somebody is speaking. So being responsive, like nodding, smiling, being warm. I just like remembered that there was a professor that I had in the past who, whenever a BIPOC person was speaking, would just be on her phone, like texting. Like it was
Mhm.
very evident too. Like she would just be like, and then somebody else would like say something and then she'd be like, oh. So that is the complete opposite of
Right.
paying attention when somebody is
Mhm.
speaking. Inviting somebody to share their thoughts or asking for their opinions, right? If you see somebody who, perhaps has like a marginalized identity that you can uh just notice, and you
Mhm.
notice that they're like being quiet or whatever in a way that doesn't make them feel uncomfortable, right? There's a difference between being like, hey, you have to speak right now, and very gently being like, I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about this, would love to hear your opinions about this, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Giving credit where credit is due, recognizing people's achievements, right? These are things that really help people feel seen, I think, and feel supported by their community. Um, so just, I think like practicing these small things often is a really important step in getting to that place of inclusion that we want graduate school and other spaces to be.
I love your context around this inviting someone to share their thoughts, asking for their opinions, because I feel like this is one that is pretty prevalent in academic spaces,
Mhm.
which someone can be attending to use this as a micro affirmation, but then it turns into maybe the person that they're asking for them to share their thoughts or opinions is being seen as now you are the expert on this topic
Mhm.
because of, let's say,
Mhm.
your racial identity,
Yeah.
which then can fall into a
Right.
microaggression, right? So
Right.
I do like the way that you frame that as in, try if possible, try to like read the room. Do
Yeah.
not do not try to overly convince this person to share their thoughts if it doesn't appear
Yeah.
that they're comfortable with doing so, checking in and so forth.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um, and I'm just gonna kind of like hop forward because we have, well, actually, no, I'm just gonna read this quote. So this quote in terms
We
of
love our
racial, we
quotes.
do love our quotes. Like sometimes people just say things better than I can, and so I'm like, I just love quotes. Racial micro affirmations are determined as powerful ways that communities of color can resist racism and affirm their value and humanity. They're everyday strategies of validation and acknowledgement that people of color can utilize with and amongst each other and in the context of structural racism. So here we have two diagrams. The first of one being, racial microaggressions as risk factors. So things that we've like talked about, right? Like interactions, racist language, text, racist stereotypes, everyday acts, racist spaces. These are risk factors. But then on the flip side of that, we have affirmations as protective factors. So texting people, well, no, I think text by meaning academic text, but also texting people in a very nice and understanding way. That could also be the,
For sure.
I guess that would be like an everyday validation, everyday affirmation, counter spaces, ethnic studies, visual and performing arts, all of these sorts of things that broaden the space. So, kind of in relation to that, micro affirmations are tiny acts of opening doors to opportunity, gestures of inclusion and caring, and graceful acts of listening. They lie in the practice of generosity and consistently giving credit to others and providing comfort and support when others are in distress, which is especially needed in graduate school because oftentimes, I don't know about you guys, but I think as a grad student, I am often in distress. And
Same here.
I think
Yeah.
like having this is like really helpful.
I mean, and with the stress, that comes needing space,
Right.
right? Like being able to figure out ways in which that you can separate yourself from distressing situations.
Right.
So that leads us to talk about counter spaces. So students of color need spaces apart from a negative campus racial climate to challenge the racism they experience on their campuses. By coming together, students of color are able to affirm and validate their racial identities and racialized experiences. A lot of times I hear people of color, students of color, often say when they get together, I thought that was just me, or,
Yeah,
I thought I was just
totally.
like dreaming this, or
Yeah.
like, I thought I was just like making this up. I thought I was taking this too personal and like really validating, no, this happened to you. And then
Yeah,
let's figure out ways in which that we can mitigate the stress that you're having regarding
definitely.
this microaggression, for
Hmm.
example.
Hmm.
And then counter spaces can be developed either formally or informally, such as student organizations or bodies, cultural centers, support services, affinity spaces, community outreach groups, peer groups, and so forth. And then on with our trajectory with coping and healing, practicing self-care, this is a big one. I advocate for self-care all the time.
Yep.
Prioritize your mental as well as your physical, your emotional, your social, your spiritual wellness. And this can look different across different individuals. Maybe it's hydrating, eating regularly, sleeping, moving your
Hmm.
body, getting physical, doing relaxation exercises, whether that's like grounding techniques, deep breathing, meditating, yoga, running, progressive muscle relaxation,
Hmm.
engaging in mindfulness, engaging in prayer, and engaging in affirmations.
Hmm.
Get yourself grounded and connected to the here and now, the present, right? So you're not thinking about the future, you're not thinking about the past where you were racial microaggressed,
Hmm.
but you're thinking about the here and now
Yep.
and engaging in at least one activity that you truly enjoy every single day.
Yep. Okay. And then a few other coping and healing sort of things. So identifying safe people and spaces for support. I think like something that has really gotten me through graduate school is um, really having the privilege to figure out and connect with people who really understand me. And so,
Mhm.
we're just kind of like commiserating together, but it is really helpful because I think it's so often where people can feel really isolated in graduate school for whatever reason. Obviously, microaggressions kind of perpetuate that. And so having that safe space, like these counter spaces, can be really important. Connecting with community, family, friends, acknowledging and validating your feelings and expressing them. So journaling, creating, exercising, as Wynta was saying, playing music, asking for support when you're struggling, because we all have those moments of struggling, and it's
Mhm.
totally fine. And related to that, talking to a therapist.
Mhm.
Um, And then just honoring your strengths, right? I think sometimes we can get so lost in stressing out about, oh, like this other student is better than me, or they had a better presentation, or they got into this conference and I didn't.
Yeah.
But in actuality, I think recognizing your own accomplishments and achievements is a really big deal. Finding ways to celebrate your racial ethnic identity, join groups and organizations with like-minded people, volunteering or being part of causes that are important to you, finding empowerment and activism and resistance, and reclaiming your time and energy. So really being able to like draw boundaries for yourself. Um, and determine like for yourself when you're burning out and when you need to take a step back.
Exactly. I'm gonna plug our groups right here,
Yes.
giving that. So at the Graduate Center Wellness Center, we do have support groups based on identities. So Helen, you
Yes.
run
I am
the,
the facilitator of the Asian Graduate Student Support Group.
and I am the co-facilitator of the Black Graduate Student Support Group here at the Graduate Center.
Yes.
And remember, right, coping looks different to different people and at different times, right? And it's important to consistently explore what your needs may be and attend to them with self-compassion, not being judgmental, like Helen was getting at earlier, and that the coping process must be ongoing as well as persistent because racism is.
Yep. And we're ending with a few resources. So here are some BIPOC focused apps. Liberate is one that is primarily geared towards the Black experience. It's like daily meditation. Shine is another app that can calm anxiety and stress and kind of build habits to better manage that. The Safe Place is a self-care app and mental health check-in. Um, some other resources here are like some books and like card decks. So Rest is Resistance is a book and a card deck that you can get together. The Remedy Melanated Affirmation deck, Set Boundaries, Find Peace, which is also like a book and a card deck that goes well together. Um, and then a few mental health resources that you can access. So kind of like what Wynta was saying, here at the Graduate Center, we have SCS, counseling services. You can reach us, in person at our suite or through email or visit the website. Different websites too. So therapy for Black girls, therapy for Black men, Latinx therapy, Asian Mental Health Collective, National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network, Inclusive Therapists. Um, Alma is like another big one. The Open Path Collective. So these are more like low to free services, so sliding scale. Open Counseling, Psychology Today, where you can like look through therapists. The CUNY Crisis Text Line, the Trevor Project Hotline for LGBTQA plus services, the Steve Fun Hotline, National Grad Crisis Hotline, and NYC Well. So there are a few uh, places for you to look into to start off. Here are some references because we know we all love our references. Um, yeah, that's
That is it for
that is it.
us.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing. Um, but thank you for watching that all the way to the end. We hope that this was informative and helpful and, supportive,
Educational, yeah.
educational in some way. Um, and, at any point in time, if you feel like you need extra support or if you want extra resources, the Wellness Center is always here. So feel free to reach out and
Hey,
we
and we
will.
have our contact. We have put our emails too
Yeah,
at the beginning of the PowerPoint. Feel free to reach out via email as well. If you have any
definitely.
questions or comments.
Yep. All right. Take care. Best of luck. And we wish you well.
Bye.
Bye.